As discussed, my name is Mark McHale. Currently, I do absolutely no work with teens, so I want to be very clear. But previously, that was a big part of my job, was recruiting, training, and supervising teens. When we talk about youth employment, the figures often go from 15 to 24. Most of what I say here is going to be focused on 15 to 19 because teenagers and 20-somethings are, in many ways, completely different animals. So, as mentioned, I already went over what I have done. What I want to mention is what I don't do, which is I'm not a lawyer and I'm not an HR consultant. So what I'm talking about today is based on my experience. It is 100% anecdotal information. So please, if you're going to follow any of my advice, make sure that you're consulting proper legal authorities before you decide to sue me. In really broad strokes, why should you hire young workers? On the face of things, they can be cheaper. For a lot of business owners, they'll say, yeah, the difference in minimum wage, there's so many problems with young workers, it's not going to work out in the end. They end up being more expensive. I'm going to talk today about some of the ways to prevent that. So by having your young employees work better, faster, they will feel more capable and you will retain them more, and it will help eliminate that. So they will, in fact, become cheaper. But I don't think that's the big benefit of hiring young people. The perspectives that they have on the work you're doing that's really going to be the big benefit, you're going to use their youth for your gain, like some evil fairy tale figure or something. You're also, if done properly, they're going to improve the performance of all your staff, not just your younger staff. And the perspective they have now is going to be the normal perspective soon. So that's the other advantage. The reason I am here in particular is because I had a conversation with Tara from Economic Development. She was talking about a problem two problems that have been noticed in the county. They want to do workshops for young people to help make them employable, because young people have a problem. You can't get a job if you don't have experience, and if you don't have a job, you never get experience. It's a perpetual problem. There's also the problem that employers have vacancies, especially for low-skilled or unskilled labor. And when you do hire those people, keeping them in the fold. So those problems should cancel each other out, but they don't. And a lot of that has to do with the way that we think about our own work, the way that we think about our organizations and how they should run, and the way that young people think that the world should work, and when those two things come into conflict. I had to go through a mindset shift. So I've worked in libraries for 10 years, and that was the first time I really started working with teenagers since I had been one. So I managed in retail, 20-somethings. It's very different when someone's job is paying their bills, and that's rarely the case for teenagers. My dad had a disability. He was visually impaired, and for him to get a job and to retain a job, he had to do everything perfectly. He had to be better than someone that was perfectly sighted. And so work ethic was really important to him, and not just work ethic. You dress right for work, you're on time for work, all those traditional values. He really hammered them into his kids. Adding to that, what he did for most of his career was he worked for the federal government processing employment insurance claims, which means that people were coming in, many of whom had been fired, telling him stories about why they had been fired. And often the employer is, it was their fault, I just did this thing, it wasn't a big deal. So he heard all those sob stories, and he didn't want his kids to be the ones on that side of the table. You have a job, take it seriously, don't get fired, don't do anything wrong. So, and really, he started talking to us about this stuff when we were like 6 and 7, not when you're supposed to be talking to kids about jobs. It's very important to him. So school came first, and the reason school came first is because that's going to lead to your adult job. Your job came second. If you had a job during high school and you had to, because once you're in grade 9, no clothes were paid for, no DVDs, video games, those, you're paying for that. So school was first, job was second, whatever else you have time to do, that's fine. But those are the priorities. Your boss is the boss. If your boss is telling you to do something, you do something. The exception is if you're going to die. So, shaky ladders, that's when you disagree with your boss. Everything else, do what you're told. And I got paid $6.10. I remember the first time I got a 10-cent raise. Boy, did that feel good. And most of my friends had jobs. That was the norm. If you didn't have a job, you're kind of made fun of for being rich and bougie and that sort of thing. So that was my normal. When I was thinking about this presentation, I had to remind myself that me being a teenager was 20 years ago, which hurts. So when I started working as an adult in supervisory positions, I realized things had changed a lot. So nowadays, school probably comes first for kids, probably. Their extracurriculars are second. By and large, that's the case. A job is nice to have. It is not, it's just not the same. If you're the boss of a teenager now, it's not, jump how high. It is, you have to do this. Why? How do we do it? Why do I have to do it that way? Can I do it my own way? There's a lot of questions. Kids now are taught inquiry-based learning. They're taught to ask questions. So that's how they respond. $13 an hour for minimum wage for 15 to 17-year-olds. It's 15 if they're older than that. A lot of places are paying their teenagers the same as $15 minimum wage. Different employers have different perks they can offer, whether it's store discounts or whatever. Tips are a huge one, obviously. And the number of teens in the workforce has dropped to 50%. Before I go further with that, what do people think that the 15 to 19-year-old workforce participation rate, what do you think that peaked at in Canada? I think I saw it as 50%. I thought, oh, that's terrible. But what was it ever? Guess?
Like at the highest?
At the highest.
65. Yeah, 65.
60, yeah. So that's just proof that what I thought is just my thought. I hadn't really, this is not the societal perspective. So things are very different today. They're different for teenagers. So as employers, we don't always think from their perspective. We think about what we need from them. But we should be thinking about what they're capable of giving. There is way more homework than when any of us were in high school. That gets documented all the time. So there's a lot more that they have to do. The other thing is scholarships. So scholarships and school entrance, when you're thinking about how much a teen employee is going to make working wherever your workplace is, if the difference between staying home and studying, working on homework 2 extra nights a week is going to get them a $10,000 renewable entrance scholarship, you're not paying them $10,000 a year. So it pays for them to stay home and work harder on school. School is way more expensive. From the time I went to undergrad to now, tuition has doubled. So those scholarships are way more important. The other thing is the cost of extracurriculars. I will never forget the time that a student called in and he was supposed to be working a shift and everyone said, where's so-and-so, where's so-and-so? And then the phone rang and I picked up the phone and it was him and he said, I can't come into work today due to hockey. And I just my brain broke, I'm thinking about what, my dad would have grabbed this kid by his ear and dragged him to work. But you have to think about it. Parents are paying thousands of dollars to keep their kids in extracurriculars. And, hockey's an easy one to pick on in Canada, but it's not the only one. So you're going to come to, work at the library and make $50 or $60 for your shift, and you're going to miss out on a tournament that you have to pay for that costs $300. So it's, if you think in a business mindset, $300 is more than $60. There's other big world changes that affect how ready students are to be participants in the workforce. And I think we sometimes underestimate how much things like online shopping and Uber Eats and things like that affect kids. They don't go to stores and they don't go to restaurants. So if you're running a store or a restaurant, you can't just expect them to mimic what they've seen on the other side. Sometimes when you hire a teen to be a cashier, sometimes the first time they're in a cashier transaction is as the cashier. We've pushed things like stranger danger and why you don't engage with the wider world. Kids don't go places on their own. Little bits of confidence. Being a teenager and talking to an adult without an adult with you, they're just not doing that as often. And it's not their fault. It's not all teens, of course, but that's the reality. Most transactions are cashless. I can't remember the numbers offhand, but I'm sure we're all aware it's the dominant form of payment in Canada is credit cards, followed by Interac, followed by cash. A lot of big places like Walmarts and superstores, the cashiers, even when there is paying in with money, they're spitting out change using a computer. And so the kids aren't using cash. It's rough to expect them to. Cash handling mistakes were the biggest problem, biggest performance issue I dealt with in Stony Plain by far. And they're not using it. They don't, the value of a quarter, like really, the difference between a nickel, a dime, and a quarter, they all look the same. Why is the dime smaller? Why is it worth more than the nickel? Like, there's no reason for them to engage with those questions. The pre-job jobs that used to exist, things like lemonade stands and paper routes. Paper routes are done by adults when they're done at all, and of course we all know that papers are dying. So that's one avenue of jobs that a 6 to 12-year-old might have had that would prepare them for their job when they're 15. Job doesn't exist anymore. Mowing lawns, again, for a lot of people, mowing their lawn is a great joy and a fun activity on a Saturday. So their teens aren't doing it. They're certainly not hiring the neighborhood kid. Lemonade stands. So I'm originally from the Ottawa area, and at least twice in the last couple of years, kids that have been running lemonade stands have had bylaw officers or the Mounties called on them. Ottawa really likes rules. To shut down their illegal commercial activities. So some of these pre-job jobs are disappearing. So those are things that might have gotten kids prepared for being in the workforce. Volunteering is still, a lot of volunteer opportunities are still open. If there are young people in your life that are pre-job age, encourage them to volunteer, because that is the best way to get those types of experience now. And then, of course, with COVID, all of those things that I just said were intensified greatly in the last 2 years, which is, a blip in our life. But if you are, if you're 15 now, a lot of experience that you might have gotten when you're 13 and 14 wasn't available to you. That'll have a ripple effect forever. So we need to, if we want to have success hiring teens, having them in our workforce, we need to adjust our expectations and think about what they're actually going to be able to do, what they're going to want to do, because that's going to be ultimately what motivates them. The other things on this list are the things that I made very specific changes that I'll talk about. And again, they're just examples. Maybe they'll work for you, maybe they won't, or maybe, hopefully, my real hope is that they'll give you ideas of what you can do. So how you hire, how you train, how you schedule, and how you supervise. So this is the blow-by-blow of what I altered in Stony Plain. For hiring, one of the simplest things I did was increase the number of teens. So the prevailing wisdom when I started there was you can't give people 8 hours a week. That's not worthwhile. They're not going to apply for those jobs. That's not true, because for some, the money is why they want a job. For a lot of them, they want a job because their parents are telling them they need a job, because it looks good to have, because they're already thinking about their next job. They want to get experience now so that, Well, if I work at the Second Cup and I go to school in Montreal, I can find a Second Cup there and I'll be qualified. So the money isn't necessarily the big motivator. The other thing, so you don't need to worry about how many hours. And the other thing I noticed was that the most capable teenagers are busy. The ones with the most skills, especially interpersonal skills, they can't work 4 nights a week. They've got debate, they've got drama. The club, they might also have personal drama, but they're involved in sports. I don't want to be the best ones, the candidates I wanted to hire were the ones with the least availability. So I need to think, what do I want? Do I want the kid that's going to be easy to train, that's going to do a good job fast, but only some of the time? Or do I want someone that's going to be around a lot and maybe harder to train, maybe less proficient once they're working? Another thing that seems really simple that not all organizations do is when you're doing job interviews, don't ask teenagers the same questions that you ask adults. It's really simple. Make it very clear that if you have experience volunteering or in clubs at school or your schoolwork or whatever, that counts as experience too. So if I'm asking you about experience, feel free to talk about volunteering, talk about school, talk about sports. Because whether we used to ask the question, tell us about a time you provided excellent customer service. And a lot of kids got it right away. And they'd say, I was helping my mom, we were volunteering to make Christmas hampers and someone came, blah, blah, blah. That's great. But other kids would sheepishly say things like, well, I've never had customer service experience. If I got this job, it'd be my first job, so I'd really like this job. And you can see on their resume that they've done things where they're interacting with people and helping address their needs. And that's what I want. I want someone that is going to have a good interpersonal interaction, and they're going to meet the needs of a customer. And I know you have that experience, but you're not getting there. So sometimes terminology like customer service is off-putting, it's alienating, and they don't understand it. The other thing is some of them are very insecure about not having work experience, but they have life experience. The next point on here is applications from mom. I'm going to say a lot of things about teens and youth being great and why you should hire them. One line I always drew is if I saw a job application come into my email inbox with mom's email, not the kids, I turfed it right away. That for me is too far. If I know all the kids have email addresses, the school gives them email addresses. So I didn't accept applications from mom. I did not let parents join interviews. I did have that request sometimes. But one part where the moms are very valuable is recruitment. It's a lot of these teens, and they're going to get jobs because their parents want them to, and that's not a bad thing. Teenagers do lots of things because their parents want them to. So when we were advertising, for example, this is a public library, so we had different social media channels, including Instagram. So if we really wanted teens, you'd think that Instagram is the place. Keep in mind, this is 5 years ago. This is pre-TikTok. So if we really wanted to get at the teens, you'd drive your Instagram. But the more we'd get way more interaction on Facebook posts because their moms were finding the jobs and giving them to them. Which also means that if your business is not focused on teens as a target demographic or young people as a target demographic, your customers' kids may be your future employees. So moms do have a role in recruitment. It's just not answering interview questions for them. This is the part where I'm going to remind you I'm not an HR consultant and I am not an expert on legalities. But recruiting, I would recruit in high schools. So as a public library, we had pre-existing relationships with high schools, which may be a little more challenging with certain private businesses. But yeah, a lot of high schools do have job boards. Post-secondary institutions definitely do. They'll usually have a little bit of rigmarole, like you'll have to apply to be, I know McEwen, and I believe Nate does this too, you have to apply to be an employer that is allowed to post. But you can certainly do that. But also think about your personal network. So who do you know through, your family and friends, through service clubs or volunteerings or any hobbies that you have. You might either know young people that might be your future employees, or you might know the parents of those future employees. So when you're trying to recruit teenagers, that can be a powerful way to approach it. As I mentioned before, social media can be very useful. That is where a lot of information is coming for teens. Does anybody use Indeed to try and recruit people? It's a nightmare in my opinion. We would post positions that were like, they're grant-funded positions for young people, and we would get applications from like 45-year-old people with PhDs, and it's like, I don't even know how to sort through this. If you're going to use Indeed or Monster, any of those big job aggregators online, I would always recommend adding a step. So post the job on there and say, submit your application via email to this email address. It's just a little tip. We'll filter out 99% of the applications and 100% of the bad ones. And I just said, flex your personal network when you're looking for young employees. Be careful of hiring a coworker's kid or, even your own. Not to say it's a bad idea. They'll have a familiarity with your business and your activities that a stranger off the street won't. But it does complicate things like training and especially supervision. You never want one employee yelling across your space, "Mom, can I get help with this?" It sends a bad message. And when you're recruiting, think about what you have to offer. So this is a job ad that I did. I know I know Ever jokes are really old, but this ad is very old. So I can't remember what minimum wage was, but that's what we were paying, and we knew it was lower than I think the local Tim Hortons and a few other people that hired a lot of teens. So what did we have to offer? Well, it's a nice, clean work environment. Wear whatever you want, and we were closed on Sundays. So that was the selling features for why you might want to work for us. This is the best one, though. So I had a few different ones, and this one ended up getting used for a couple of years. You just found the edge on your university applications. As I mentioned before, the money wasn't necessarily the big motivator for a lot of teens having jobs. It was that they knew they were supposed to have a job. And so if you could talk about the skills that they would develop and that this would be something good on not just their future resume, but their university applications, that was a good way to get people to apply. Co-op programs. We did a little bit of this in Stony Plain, but I would really encourage, I don't know what sectors people are in, but the schools in this area are teaching kids a lot of skills that you may not think about. And they're usually, in my experience, co-op programs are desperate for placements. I do not want to advocate unpaid labor necessarily, but if a student can do a co-op placement in your workplace, they will A, do work for you, B, you will train them, and then afterwards you have the possibility of hiring them for a pre-trained employee. And the range of skills that kids are developing in high school programs is way wider than what you might think. Things like joinery mechanics, culinary arts, like, for restaurants, to get a kid that already knows about things like food safety, and you don't have to drill that into them because they've already completed that. I have the example I have there is escape room robot. So again, my context is a public library. So I was working we have teen programming, and we were designing escape rooms. And I was like, one of them was the idea. The premise was a spaceship that goes haywire and it starts attacking the people on it. Sort of Hal, whatever Hal is from, that movie. 2001. So I was like, I have a little bit of coding skills, and I was like, I could probably make a thing that talks. Started Googling examples of code or whatever, and then I thought, I was going to say his name. For confidentiality's sake, I'll call him Joe. Anyway, I was like, Joe, I know Joe is very interested in computers. Joe was on his way to doing a combined program at University of Waterloo and what's the other one there? Anyway, genius level computer guy. So I was agonizing over how to make this thing that would, press buttons and talk. He made it in like less than an hour. For him it was. So they have skills and they are learning them in high school, and they may not always be applicable directly, but in many cases they will be. The other big thing to change is training, and I might talk about this for a long time. Apologies in advance. So the same way that people shouldn't be asking the same job interview questions to teenagers that they're asking adults, don't train them the same way that you train adults. Number one, they're already learning a whole lot of stuff. So, they're doing physics 30 in the morning, and then in the afternoon, you're asking them to do X, Y, Z. So keep in mind, and that's not to say that they're not going to be able to learn what you have to teach them, but keep that in mind, give them a second, give them a chance to breathe. If you have training shifts, try to arrange them so they don't line up with school days if possible. So do your training on a Saturday or in the summer, for example. Training programs are, in general, it's the classic problem. If you do all the work up front, it will pay off later. So it is way more work. A lot of employers, a lot of people, we want to teach people things by just show them once and then just do it like I did it. What's the problem? The problem is that they're going to ask why and how and can I do it my way? They're going to ask a lot of questions. So don't assume that demonstrating a technique or telling someone how to do something once is going to work. People learn differently. Have your training documents, but also do those demonstrations. Talk about things. Talk about what you're doing and why you're doing it. If possible, give them a chance to make mistakes and try to work things out on their own. Another big piece is try to do videos. So training videos, we can all sort of picture still images and cheesy music and a corporate training video. I don't think things need to be that complicated, with apologies to the videographer we have here today. But
no offense taken.
if you just shoot something on your iPhone. If you're going to show them how to do something, either get them or someone else to. Everyone has cameras in their pockets. Teenagers don't look for information on Google, which is mind-blowing. Google is amazing. They go to TikTok. They go directly to it. And before that, they went to YouTube. So we should be mindful of that. That is how a lot of them are learning. So we should make sure video, if it's quick and dirty, it doesn't have to be professional, but film it and save it so you have it for next time. Make sure that they have a link to it so that they can access it later. Circling back a little bit, so training documents, you use training documents to train people when they're new, and then you also use them as a reference, meaning later on I haven't done this task in a while, so I'm going to go back and do it again later, and then you look in a binder. Those are two different, you would organize those information differently for each of those purposes. And what often happens is you only do one. So you either list your training documents in a row, we're going to train you day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, and then you're done. And then when they forget how to do something, they have to remember which day that they did that thing on to look up the information to relearn how to do it again. So a really simple thing I would highly recommend is make your training documents for later. Make them so that when the person doesn't know what to do, that they look in the section that says cashier and they're looking at what the till instructions are. Not that they have to figure out, well, what day did I learn to do debit transactions and which day did I learn to do cash? Then, I said there'd be a lot of work up front. Make a separate training document that explains how to go through the reference document, in what order. So, read page 39 on day 1, read 46 on day 2, and so forth, and sort of takes them through that reference manual. So the reference manual will work for everyone. But you probably have certain things they need to know sooner than others. Another thing I had really great success with was confidence-based assessments. So, have a big training document, work through day 1 with them. At the end of day 1, there'd be the list of the skills that they're hopefully going to learn in the training. And I would say there's 3 categories. Do you know anything about this? Could you do this with some help? And could you do this by yourself? And I would explain to them, things can move back and forth. So you might feel really confident about something the day you learn it, but then later on, it might move back, and then that's how we know how to update your training, what to teach you again or reteach you. Bright students who are used to getting good grades will always want to put everything in the far right. They'll always want to say, I can do it, I've learned it, I'm good. So you have to check in regularly and go through the things that already have a check mark. So some things that they haven't learned yet are going to move to, I could do this with help, and on to, I could do this by myself. Other things that I could do by myself, and then, a month later, I haven't had to do that. I don't know what to do. Handwritten receipts, that was one at the library. Every once in a while, someone would be renting a room from us. They would have to pay. Rentals are free at this library, by the way. But they would have to pay, and then they'd need it for tax purposes. So we'd have to handwrite a receipt because we didn't have a different process for that. So that only came up a couple times a year. And that would be a good example, I knew it was coming, to convince them, it's okay for things to slide back. And so when they're training, I'm going through the training checklist to get through the binder in the right order, and I'm doing these assessments. And when they're starting training, it would be at the end of every shift in the first week, and then maybe it's every 2 days in the second week, and then it's at month 1, month 3, 6 months, 12 months, and by that I mean, to be honest, I often didn't do the 12-month check-in because they were already doing fine. But letting them know that it's that process of those check marks, let them know that we're all getting trained, we all forget things, and it's okay to go back and you're not going to get punished for not knowing how to handwrite a receipt. I want you to know how to do that. So I want to know what I need to do to help you. It's really important to be open to feedback. A lot of us say that we are, and then in practice, we're not. Why do you do this way? Well, that's the best way to do it. I think it'd be faster if you do that. Nah. Anybody should, but especially you'll find with young people that they'll ask a lot more whys, how, and give genuine answers. Think about your answers. Why do we do it this way? There may be a safety concern. There may be, it's going to be better later. It avoids, crashing into things over there. And that's actually one of the benefits, is they're going to make you think about why you do things. And instead of looking on that as a burden, think about that as, that's a huge benefit, because it's forcing you to think about what you're doing and then how it can be better. Communication is part of training, and that is weird, because communicating is generally something that we think of as people just being able to do, or occasionally not do, but most people are able to do it. This is still under the training category of the presentation, because I really was surprised at how much this needed to be taught. Flabbergasted, really. This is where when people have negative impressions about teenagers, this is often where they come from. It is the inability to communicate with them. So the first thing is there's no right or wrong way to communicate. There are ways that work and there are ways that don't. So you may have been doing things in your business for 20 years. That's great. If they're not working with your new employees, they're not going to work with the employees after that, and they're not going to work with the employees after that. And if you want your business to last longer than 20 years, you need to be ready to adapt. It's really simple, but people of different ages communicate different ways. This is a fairly obvious thing, but I don't like talking on the telephone, generally, especially with strangers or I mean, that's a tip. I'm an elder millennial or geriatric millennial, and people have been saying that about my generation for 20 years. And so why would that's not going to change. The people that are younger than me aren't going to, I mean, maybe they will, but so far they have not radically re-embraced the telephone as a mechanism of communication. If there's a shift change, they want a text message. So you may have policies that restrict, your use of telecommunications, blah, 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 especially if you're in public sector, there may be FOIP issues and so forth. You got to text them. I have also had the opposite. I've had teens that didn't want me having their cell phone number, and they wanted emails because their emails also went to their phone. And you know what? I didn't care. I just kept track of, granted, I had a smaller workforce, like 4 to 6 of the teens. But the ones that wanted emails, I would send emails. The ones that wanted texts, I would send texts. And I could get in a huff about that and say, like, no, everybody has to pick one. And but what does that accomplish, right? What do I want to? Ultimately, I want them to know when they're supposed to work, or I want to know if they can come in and cover a shift. Do I really care how? It's the same. It's the same thing for me. I'm going to write them both from my phone, so who cares? Another big issue is dress code. If you have a dress code, explain it and why. So it's really, if a teenager spends a lot of money on jogging pants, they're going to think that those jogging pants look nice because at high school, they do look nice. If that's not appropriate or doesn't meet safety requirements in your workplace, be explicit about it and why. Libraries have a big thing about intellectual freedom and freedom of speech. So at Stony Plain Library, we didn't actually have a dress code. And that was generally fine because most adults just dress like adults, and it was all right. Occasionally, we'd have an issue with a teenager. And so I would give this little speech. And what I would say is, you can dress however you want here. Okay, you have that freedom. But remember, everyone walking through that door has the freedom to think whatever they want about you. So if you, I would use curse words, but I'm not going to do it right here. If you have a shirt that says, "I hate you," how is someone going to interact with you? They're going to think that you're a rude person. So ultimately you're going to get judged on the way you dress. So think about that and think about how you want to be judged and what's going to make a positive experience for the person that's walking through the door that you're here to help. There seems to be a lot less public speaking in schools nowadays. I don't know if that's 100% true or just anecdotal from the people that I've known, but the idea that they're going to feel comfortable speaking to a large group, don't take that for granted, or that they have any experience doing it whatsoever. As I mentioned before, their first interaction as a cashier might be as the cashier. Another thing to watch out for is the Dunning-Kruger effect, which basically the shorthand version of that is the worse someone is at something, the more likely they are to think they're great at it because they don't know enough to know that they're bad at it. One time I had a teen employee and I was walking through the library and they're helping someone with a computer. That's great, that's a normal thing. But I overheard part of their conversation and I realized that this 16-year-old was telling a 45-year-old man what they should write on their resume. I thought, we actually have resources for that. Let's look at some books. Let's recommend the career counselors in the community. I've seen your resume. It wasn't that great. That plays a lot into, like, a lot of adults hate the arrogance of young people. And some of that is just that they don't know what they don't know. And the solution to that isn't, assert your dominance and prove how great you are. The solution is to, the more they know about what they don't know, the more they realize they don't know it. So just explain it to them, right? The grunting employee. So this is the rude awakening for me about communication skills in teenagers, is we had an employee, lovely during the interview, very, very nice during the interview, then was hired, then when we were working, hi so-and-so, it's nice to see you today. literally grunted, not just at me, at all their coworkers. Anytime anyone tried to engage them in conversation, one-word answers. And so obviously they didn't understand that that's not an appropriate way to operate in a workplace, arguably at all in society. But that needed to be explained to them. And I needed to like full on explain, like if someone says, "Hi, how are you?" You respond with,
Okay, good morning, how are you?
"Yeah, thank you, Shane." There's little things where like they don't have phones. You know, the thing I said about the cashier, for a lot of kids, the first time they answer a landline telephone is at work. There's no landline at home, so no one is teaching them, like, you know, we got taught as kids, like, "Hello, McHale residents," like that sort of thing. No one's teaching them that because their parents are each answering their own phones. The kid might be answering their own phone. Who's calling them? People that already know them. So I thought, that's not going to change. There's not going to be more landline telephones tomorrow. There's not going to be more in 5 years. I need to think about this. This is my issue. So I had to break down how to answer a phone. So this is the script. You don't have to read it all, but this is the script that I developed from a training document. I broke it down to 4 elements. Salutation, identify the library, identify yourself, offer to help. And so, and there's more to this, and you know, you only really need to use 3, but you should always use at least 3. You need to offer to help, and you need to identify the library. But you need to do this, and like I needed to spell that out. I did practice conversations with them. I would call them from one phone. I could see them through the glass, and we would practice answering the telephone. And it seems really silly, but you know what? It fixed the problem immediately. All they needed to be told was that this is how this works, and it was fine. I couldn't choose teens based on their communication skills because they hadn't developed them yet. And the reason for that is because they were teenagers. So then I had to think about it. How do you know if someone's going to be a good communicator if they're not a good communicator? And I researched it, and the answer is empathy. So people that demonstrate empathy are more likely to have good communication skills because if you care about other people, then you want to make sure that you're understanding them and they're understanding you and that you can help them with their problem, which is perfect. That's exactly what you want in a customer service situation. So empathy is a great predictor of communication skills. So how do you hire for empathy? You test for it. So what we did is our interviews, we recorded everything everyone said. We graded the interviews afterwards. So we added a column. Every question on the interview, if they said something that demonstrated they cared about other people, they got a point. Simple. We wanted people with empathy. We hired for empathy. And it worked perfectly. No one that scored well on that empathy predictor, they were all very easy to train. They're all very dedicated to helping the people that came into the library. And they would have great communication skills. If not before, then certainly after. So that's a specific example. I think that's pretty applicable, to be honest, in any customer service, any customer-facing situation. There are probably other ways to other predictors that you could use in other industries. So all you need to do is make it part of your interview process, part of your selection process. So, you know, maybe you have them build something out of Lego, solve a math problem, a word problem. Like there are probably character traits that are predictors of skills in whatever business you're working in. So try to think about those and then test for them. But don't test for stuff that doesn't matter. So I just gave this example for empathy as a predictor of communication skills. If someone's a line cook, that's not how they're going to communicate, right? They're going to be shouting orders are going to be shouted at them. That's the way that works. You need people that can assemble food fast. With teenagers, a lot of adults have a lot of preconceived notions and a lot of bugaboos, and you need to figure out what's going to actually make a difference to my customers and to my business, my organization. So a good example, when people type with just their index fingers, this is called hunt and peck typing, and it drives me nuts. They do not teach kids typing in school. We used to have typing class when I was a kid, but now they just teach them typing in every class, which means that they don't teach it in any class. And so it really bugged me, all these kids that were, and I was like, this is slow and blah, blah, blah. And I was getting really like back in my day about it. And then I was like, well, let's figure this out. And you know what? If you're a home row typer, or you're a hunt and peck typer, until you get to like competitive typing, which is the thing, it doesn't matter. If someone has been hunt and peck typing their whole life, they're as fast as that on average as the average home row typer. So I thought, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter in my workplace. It doesn't matter in their schooling. It's just something that bugs me, and I need to learn to let it go. And clearly, I'm talking about it years later, so I haven't totally let it go. But so that didn't matter. But file management does matter. So the other problem I was encountering is all the students in that area used Google products in their school. And what that meant is they could just search for everything in their Google Drives, or they didn't know how to use file folders. They didn't know how to look through a file tree to find particular documents. That's a problem. We use those all the time. This I need to teach. Type however you want, but we need to teach you how to organize files. There are hurdles to hiring teenagers, and I've so far basically pretended that they don't exist. There are specific rules about who can work in Alberta and at what ages. There are specific rules for people in artistic endeavors, which I'm just assuming is not the case here, and independent contractors, which is the funniest name for babysitters I've ever heard, but that's what the legislation is talking about. So I'm ignoring those two categories. But 15 to 17-year-olds, they can't work during school hours. They can't, if they're in hospitality, they can't work between midnight and 6 a.m., and they have to have adult supervision between 9 and midnight. If they're in other sectors, working overnight requires guardian consent and supervision. Off-campus education. I never set out to use this loophole, but I ended up using it a lot. If someone is in off-campus education program, they can work during school hours. Off-campus education, the most common form of that is homeschooling. So again, I never sought out to hire homeschoolers. But when I did have homeschoolers, it was great because they could cover shifts for adults in the middle of the day. So those are some of the rules like that can be very restrictive. 13 to 14-year-olds are allowed to work in Alberta, but same rules, they can't work during school hours, and they can only work for 2 hours on instruction days. So Monday to Friday, unless there's a holiday, they can only work for 2 hours, that's a big hurdle for a lot of employers. They can work 8 hours on Saturdays and Sundays, so that's fine. I hired someone a month before their 15th birthday, and it was a real pain. I had to stay an extra hour to basically cover so they could work. I worked one of their 3 hours. But anyway, I don't recommend that. The big thing is you can't ask how old someone is in a job interview. You can't do that to someone who's 70, and you also can't do that to someone who is 12. That is a human rights violation. It will potentially get you into legal trouble. What you can ask is if someone is capable of working shifts. So if you outline what the shift is, and you may want to have a piece of paper on hand that explains this, it made the link at the bottom here, the youth employment laws on the provincial government site, you can just copy and paste these, which is what I did here. And you can have those at the top. So it says 12-year-olds can only work at this time, and then it says our shifts are, typically Monday to Friday, 5 to 9 p.m. Give them a second to read that. Are you able to work these shifts? That is the correct way to address that human rights issue in any job interviews. This is not just about kids. If, for example, your shifts are on Sunday and someone is a Christian who observes the Sabbath, then that's the way that you ask that question to avoid discriminating against them based on their religion. Refer to that site. Once again, not a lawyer. With all those rules in mind, try to be flexible when you're scheduling teenagers. They have busy lives. They have got a lot of stuff going on. And if you put it to them, show up for your shift on Wednesday or you are fired, good luck to you. You're going to be looking for a new employee on Thursday. I had the most acute version of this is I had someone that I really wanted to hire. One of the highest interview scores we'd ever done with a teenager. And they had been a receptionist at their school for over lunch, which is like perfect. They had they're one of the few people with all these communication skills built in at a young age. And the problem was there were, part-time receptionist, part-time student, full-time volleyball player. So for like 2 months of the year, I could only get them on Saturdays. And I wanted people that could work a couple nights a week plus a weekend shift. So I had to hem and haw. Ultimately, I hired them. And every fall, or whenever it was, I'd lose them effectively for 2 months. Sometimes on Saturdays they had terms, couldn't even work then. But by the time their volleyball season was over, so-and-so's musical was starting, and now they couldn't work, 3 nights a week. So it all kind of evened out. This is the more students you have, the more likely things are to even out. But I would recommend, you're going to have them for short in terms of years anyway, so get the best ones. They're the easiest to train. They're more likely to stick around. And overall, these things will balance out as long as you have more than 1 or 2 employees. Supervising. Be nice to people. This quote comes from a teen, and I was asking him about how we compared as an employer to his previous employer. I won't say their name because it's libelous or slander, I guess I'm speaking. I'm just happy to work somewhere where they don't yell at you. His previous boss, I'll say it was a grocery store. It was a chain grocery store. So they no reason they shouldn't have comprehensive training documents. They have managers and supervisors, and they should have all the infrastructure they need to treat employees right. And his supervisor there regularly screamed at him to the point that he cried. That's ridiculous. I mean, that anyone should treat anyone that way, but what were they expecting this teen employee to do? How is he supposed to never make mistakes? We had a training binder, we had a training checklist, we had a self-assessment, we did 2 weeks of training, we had follow-ups after that. And that seems like a lot of work, but it produces a culture where people feel supported. And when people feel supported, if you support someone trying to do something, they're going to want to do that thing. There are incentives to hiring teens, and some of them are listed here in very, very small print is the monetary ones. So why would you hire a teen? Well, they're cheaper. Realistically, you can pay a 15 or 17-year-old minimum wage, which is $13 an hour right now. But there's also a lot of grants. So some of them are very sector specific. So if you're, an engineering firm, there's a lot for trades. I know nothing about any of them, but there are a lot available for trades. The big one I would push people to explore is Canada Summer Jobs, they change the criteria for it every year. Once you've gotten it, it's relatively easy to get again. The hiring priorities, you can lobby your MP to get some input on those. But they're relatively easy grants to get, and they will pay the wages or a portion of the wages either way, depending on how you apply for the grant. For a young Canadian. So, and I think their definition of the last time I applied was 15 to 30. I'm not sure if they've changed that. They do occasionally. But when you're hiring those people, just make it clear that it is either hire it as a term. So if you're hiring them till August 31st of that year, do that, or say it's a term with the possibility of continuation or whatever. But relatively easy process. It is intimidating. You do need to sign up for a government account and go through a really ugly federal government website, because that's the only kind of federal government website. But once you do it 1 year and you get it, reapply. Some of the other ones you need to do something different each year. Canada's summer jobs, never had that problem. A lot of copying and pasting from one year to the next. So those are some monetary incentives. I don't think those matter very much. I think the big advantage is how it will improve your workplace culture. Just right off the bat, it's kind of nice to have young people around. They're not old and jaded and dragging their old bones around like we are. They're going to offer you a fresh perspective. There's someone new to talk to. If you've been working with the same team for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you're going to get an injection of some new blood that's going to have new conversations with people. And that kind of makes everyone feel a little more energized. I think that's a really key thing that gets overlooked. All of the things that I said before, how you can change your hiring practices, how you can change your supervision, how you can change your training, all those apply to everyone. And that's what we found. So that empathy is a predictor of communication skills. That was brought in because of a grunting teenage employee. But after doing that, we thought, well, don't we want people that care? Like we're a public library, people of, unhoused people, senior citizens, moms, and everyone is coming into a public library. Don't we want people that are just inclined to care about whoever? So we put it on the adult hiring process. That checklist, we changed it a lot because the adults had more responsibilities, but we built it out from what we started with the teens. So it was kind of great because I hired new teenagers every year, but I only hired new adults every couple of years. But I kind of got to iterate, to develop and redevelop some of these practices by using the teens as guinea pigs, which sounds bad, but it was good for the teens, it was good for the employees, it was good for the libraries, and it was good for the patrons. A culture of training, it leads to better employees. So one thing a lot of places will have a structure like employee, trainer, supervisor, manager, whatever. And training is left up to certain employees. I highly recommend not doing that. 2 reasons. Well, there's many, but anyway, 2 I can think of right now. One is that different people respond to different people. Not everyone gets along, and some people get along better with it. Like, it's just natural. There's no sense pretending that's not true. So if a teen is going to click with Shane and not with Mike, well, it doesn't matter if Mike's the trainer. I'm going to get Shane to show this person what to do. Because then what happens? When they have a question and they don't know the answer, they're going to feel way more comfortable going to Shane. So they're more likely to form better relationships, and they're also not going to have negative interactions with Mike. So in the long run, they're going to have a better relationship with him too. Sort of throw you under the bus. The other sneaky advantage of this is if you have a right way of doing things written in your binder, and you want everyone to do that. Like I said, you should be open to feedback. If people prove there's a better way, change how you're doing it. But the other advantage, when you don't have specific people training, when everyone is shared in the goal of doing things the right way, that stays the way that it gets done. Because what happens in a lot of places is the trainer says, oh yeah, do A, B, C. That's how we do it. Check the box. And then a month later, they're working with someone, and someone's like, skip B, just do AC. So your culture is getting, all your documents are being undermined, you're being undermined, the trainer's being undermined, and maybe AC is the right way to do things. Maybe you need to change your binder. But the other thing is, if you're engaging your other staff in the training process, they're going to offer you that feedback before they tell you're going to have the opportunity to change that before they train that young person. And they're going to have more ownership of that. So they're more likely to follow doing things the way that you want them to do. That is exactly what happened. Try to avoid having new people show new people for pretty obvious reasons. But Mike's going to make sure you get to the right people throughout the day. But then Mike takes so and says, okay, well, Shane's going to show you how to make the gadgets. So it creates a learning culture. It creates a more ownership of your processes, and that just makes everything click along a lot better. The other things, and these are culture things too, I swear I'm very close to the end, it helps you keep up with the times. So like I keep saying, if your business is stuck on landline telephones, there's a place for them, right? But if you're expecting to cold call customers 15 years from now, that's probably not going to happen, right? So you use these are signals. Like the teenagers today are your employees tomorrow. They're also your customers tomorrow. So if you have good teen employees, like they will bring you business because their whole personal networks now suddenly know about your business and like it. So they're going to act as brand ambassadors. They may also, of course, turn into your long-term employees if they're great and you want to keep them, then that's great too. But they also give you insight into how the world is changing, and not the way that articles say that the world is changing, and especially not the way that articles say that New York is different and what's going on in San Francisco. They're going to give you insight into how life has changed in Strathcona County, in the Edmonton region, in Alberta. So they're this window into the future, and if it's an opportunity to help understand and engage with younger people.